everybody, and welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob, it's Diana Perry Cruz.
Oh, you're breaking the mixer here, now. Be careful.
Hi, everyone. It's Jackie, not Perry Cruz.
No, we could be like sister wives. Jackie Perry Cruz. No?
Nope.
No.
Weird.
We're not doing that?
I keep my own last name.
You're my podcast wife.
Jackie McDonald.
Different.
Yeah, very different. I'm independent. I do not need to change my last name. Jackie McDonald. Wife number 2 of Robert Perry Cruz.
Nope. Don't start that.
No polygamous wife of mine is going to take a different last name. Anyway, this is ABA Inside Track, not the podcast about polygamy and how to change women's last names, but actually a podcast about behavior analysis and research in behavior analysis. This week, we are going to be talking about CMOs.
CMOs.
We're going to talk about CMOs, conditioned motivating operations. Specifically, we're going to be talking about CMO-Rs a bit, and then we're going to be talking about just, how to use CMOs and EOs and all that good stuff. This was originally a topic that was requested by Robert Salvador back in April of 2016. We said, sure, we'll totally get to that one. Then we were reminded that we hadn't talked about it by, it was Allison Olmsted, and that was in May of 2017. So we have eventually, now that it's October of 2017, we're finally getting around to CMOs, to CMOs, which are hard and complicated. So let's see how we do. So why don't we start off by giving everyone a brief review, wink, wink, review of what CMOs are.
All right.
Who wants to do that?
Sure thing.
Diana wanted me to say her name, I think. She made me face. So, Diana, please.
No, I didn't. I was just waiting for my opportunity to jump in and talk about motivating operations, which is where we need to start if we want to talk about CMOs. We had to back it up and talk more generally about motivating operations as a whole. So to do that, we should probably go back in time and talk about Jack Michael, who initially established the term establishing operations back in 1980. 80.
Yeah, not 60s, 80s.
Where are they
No, it
going
was
to
80.
get 60
It was
from?
1980.
It was 80.
Yeah, okay.
80, 81, 82 were the three.
Oh, yeah.
80, 81, 82.
Okay, sorry. So all the way back to Jack Michael in the early 80s.
When I was born.
Me too, man.
And then what was that article called? It was like a tubular review.
Back in the 80s, I was talking about establishing operations. I don't remember the name of that article.
Wow, that's the BoJack Horseman theme.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I'm watching
We're on
that.
the same page for cultural reference.
Wow.
Oh.
That never happens.
It really doesn't. Good stuff. So he first started talking about EOs, or establishing operations, which was a term he used to refer to a state in which there might be an increased value for engaging in a particular behavior based on the current environmental conditions that were present. And it also might increase the value of the reinforcer that you would be gained by engaging in that behavior. However, establishing operations really only addressed the increasing of those types of values. It didn't address decreasing of values. So then in 1993, Laraway and colleagues went back and said, well, in addition to establishing operations, we also have abolishing operations, in which some of those environmental factors are going to decrease the value of future reinforcers or decrease the probability of engaging in behavior to access those reinforcers.
Abolishing operations are so 90s.
So 90s.
Whereas establishing operations, so 80s.
That's really interesting. So it's like pop to grunge.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Except grunge is really late 80s, let's be honest.
Most people would say grunge started with Nevermind, which was 91.
But anyway.
But Nirvana's 89.
Well, that's when they formed.
One thing I love is they give us the definition of the MO, right? You said?
Yeah.
It alters the value of the reinforcer. I love it when Michael says it changes how much you want.
Is want in quotes.
Yeah, I love that. Something and how hard you will work in quotes to get
Air
it.
quotes.
Yeah,
I love that.
You know your concept is super hard to describe when it's like, the only way I can describe it is by air quoting common terms.
Layman's terms.
Air quoting want and work. So I think that's actually been really helpful for me when I try to unpack motivating operations. So funny tidbit is Diana and I went to graduate school a long time ago for our master's.
Hilarious.
It is pretty hilarious that we did not learn at all about motivating operations. Zero.
I remember my class.
We did, but it was
A
like this
little bit.
new concept
Right.
that was sort of, tacked on at the end of a class.
Right. It was like, oh yeah, this is happening. You should know about this. See ya.
Anyway.
Yeah, I believe
SDs.
the class I had where we talked about MOs, I came in and I was like, oh man, I have no idea what I just read. This is so confusing. I think the professor came in and said, does anyone else know what the hell is going on in this chapter?
Yeah, and we should say that there's a caveat that not everyone agrees that MOs are important to discuss or include. There was actually a really awesome discussion at Mass ABA this year where two notable speakers came up and discussed why we need MOs and why we don't need it to discuss MOs. So they had a very long discussion about it. No one came up with a...
Oh, really? There was no solid answer at
There's
the end
no
of this
solid
debate?
answer, but...
That's so surprising.
But yeah, so I think that's something to think about.
So since these aren't important, that's the end of the episode. Thanks so much for listening to our... Oh, what? No. Okay, we're going to...
No.
All
We're
right,
going to keep going. We're all in agreement that there is an importance to antecedent events preceding behavior, right?
Absolutely.
So, typically we talk about that in terms of discriminative stimuli, and discriminative stimuli signal the availability of a reinforcer following engagement in a particular behavior. And that's sort of tried and true. Everyone seems on board.
Yep.
With the idea of the discriminative stimulus, right?
And that's part of the 3-term contingency that was proposed
Sure
by
is.
Skinner. So you have your discriminative stimulus, you have your response, you have your consequence. And they always usually say it's the discriminative stimulus drives the boat, or consequence drives the bus, right?
They being me and Jackie.
They. They being us. The consequence, I always like to imagine, this is going to sound silly, but I always like to imagine the 3-term contingency in a line, and then that there's a rainbow going over the behavior.
Hoping you'd bring up the rainbow.
Yeah, I love the rainbow. No, so like because the consequence and discriminative stimulus are so closely tied together, if there's no consequence following behavior, the discriminative stimulus will not signal the availability of reinforcement or punishment, right? So I love to think of the rainbow above. So like when I'm thinking it in my head, I actually put my arms over my head and have my hands touch in the middle and make a rainbow and think, oh yeah, this side is the discriminative stimulus, this side is the consequence, and then my head is the behavior. And I do this, and I do it in class too, and people are like, what is going on?
Then do a little pirouette.
Yeah, but that's how I think about the 3-term contingency.
I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So the MO is an additional way to think about antecedent events and antecedent stimuli. And for me, the key here to get the discrimination is that with a discriminative stimulus, it's going to signal the availability of the reinforcer, right? And with an MO, it's going to alter the value of the reinforcer.
Yeah, and there's 2 properties of MOs. The 2 properties are they have a value-altering effect, and they also have a behavior-altering effect.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're going to be more likely to engage in the behavior to go get that reinforcer.
Right. Or less likely.
Or less likely.
Right.
Because it's more valuable.
Or less valuable.
Right.
So those are the 2 main properties of MOs. Value-altering effect, it increases or decreases the value of the reinforcer, and the behavior-altering effect, you have an evocative effect where you're increasing the behavior, or you have an abative effect where you're decreasing.
Abative or abative?
I've heard abative.
Abative.
But I also say words wrong all the time and pretend that I'm right, so I don't know.
Because you debate. You debate something.
I say abative. I don't actually ever say that word, but if I did, I would say abative effect.
Yes. Okay. That sounds good to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's MOs.
And then
EOs, AOs.
Yeah, and one other thing to note is that Michael did write another conceptual article in 2007, and he said that MOs may also alter other dimensions of behavior, such as response latency, magnitude, or relative frequency. So it's just not that value altering or behavior altering. It can also alter other dimensions of behavior as well.
Good. I like that. That's great.
Excellent. So that takes care of the basics of the MOs.
So I have an example of an MO that might be helpful.
Okay.
So let's think about an athlete,
Done.
right? You
Yep.
think of
Okay.
that athlete.
I'm
You're
thinking.
thinking of me.
I'm thinking of the pole vaulter from our last episode.
Okay.
Yes.
So think about that. So think about the athlete working away pole vaulting in the hot sun.
Okay.
So we're hot sun pole vaulting for 5 hours,
It's a long time.
right? And then when they're done, it's now sunset. Let's get it. It's cool. And they walk over and there's a huge pitcher of ice cold water.
Okay.
We all know that after 5 hours of pole vaulting, one may be a little bit thirsty, right?
Mm-hmm.
For two
Yeah.
reasons. It's been a long time since the athlete has ingested any fluid.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it was a very hot day,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
So those are the things that are going to alter the probability that the athlete is going to drink water. So that's
Great.
an example of an MO. Or I like to think about this one too.
Uh-huh.
This is my other example. Let's say that I'm going on a binger
Okay.
and I wake up Sunday morning and I eat a cake,
Mhm.
a peanut butter cake,
Okay.
Okay.
the whole thing by myself.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then I go to my mom's house and she's like, "Oh, look, I made peanut butter cupcakes," which are usually my favorite thing.
Right. Uh-huh.
I'm less likely to eat those peanut butter cupcakes because
Oh,
I
gotcha.
had eaten an entire cake just a few minutes ago before going
Right.
there, right?
Yes.
So the value of those cupcakes has gone markedly down.
Right. So eating an entire cake is an AO
Right.
for then eating a whole pan of cupcakes.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And working out in the hot sun for 5 hours is an EO for accessing water.
Right.
Right?
Increasing the likelihood of the behavior with the water and decreasing the likelihood of eating the cupcakes.
Excellent.
Eating cupcake behavior.
And then furthermore, in the water example,
Mhm.
you could be, really thirsty and not have had water for 5 hours. But if there's no water available, you still can't go drink water, right? So the
Right.
EO is now present, but until you see that ice cold pitcher of water on the
The
table,
discriminative stimulus.
you can't engage in the behavior. So the pitcher
Right.
of water is the SD for the availability of the reinforcer.
But you may engage in behavior that has previously evoked water drinking behavior, like
And it's gonna
running
increase
around and
the
looking for
likelihood-
faucets.
Yes, so it's going to increase the likelihood of behavior that will produce access to water. But until you encounter that actual availability of the water, then that's the SD.
Yes.
Right. And I know a lot of people have problems and questions surrounding, is it an MO or is it an SD? And Langthorne and McGill in 2012 did a tutorial in behavior analysis and practice, and these are the two questions that they asked.
Okay.
They asked, is the consequence more available or more valuable following a period of deprivation? And does the antecedent event meet both requirements of the definition of a discriminative stimulus? Remember, discriminative stimulus is in its presence is reinforcement available for a certain classes of responses, and in its absence, reinforcement is not available.
Gotcha.
So
Okay,
I like
cool.
to ask those questions to myself.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
So that takes care of MOs. Review of MOs. What about these CMOs?
Before we talk about CMOs, do you think we should talk about UMOs?
I do.
Right? Because MOs are just MOs.
We're never going to get to CMO.
MOs
I'm
are.
just kidding.
We only got so much time in an episode,
That's true. But if we
I haven't
It's
even,
all-
I haven't
it's
even
all
introduced
important.
the article.
This is also important because
It
you have
is.
to lay the background here.
Uh,
Okay. So, UMOs are unconditioned motivating operations,
Mm-hmm.
which means that the reinforcer that is in question is a primary reinforcer.
Such as food, drink, environmental stimulation, or preferred activities.
That's it. It's a short list.
Yeah.
I mean, there's other things like warmth and
sexual stuff.
shelter,
Right.
freedom from physical restraint.
Right.
That's on
Bill
the
of
list. It's on
Rights.
the
Yeah,
list.
it's
No,
on the list.
It's
It
on the
really
list.
is.
Okay.
right to bear arms.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That's funny.
And those are the UMOs.
Right.
So if we are discussing motivating operations and we're talking about things like being out in the sun for 1 million hours, not having anything to drink, then that establishing event is a UMO.
Unconditioned.
Or UMOs. No one calls them that. Don't call them that. So that's distinguished from CMOs, which are, you probably guessed by now, conditioned motivating operations, which basically is just anything that isn't a UMO.
Right.
So UMOs, you're born finding those things, reinforcing or punishing, and then a CMO is anything beyond that that's been conditioned to find reinforcing or punishing.
Previously neutral events may require the status of a CMO after having been systematically preceded or paired with a UMO, another CMO, or a particular type of reinforcement.
Say what?
Yeah. And there's 3 forms of CMOs.
Okay. Are we ready?
Oh, gosh. Take a deep breath, then let's do it. Ooh, I've been listening to LeVar Burton reads, and before he does, he's like, now everybody take a deep breath. And I actually do in the car. I'm like,
nice.
Okay, here we go. So the 3 forms of CMOs are surrogate CMOs, reflexive CMOs, and transitive CMOs. We are not going to spend a ton of time on surrogate CMOs today.
Right. Because there's pretty big debate about whether they exist.
Right. So what they are, a surrogate CMO or a CMOS, is a previously neutral stimulus that following temporal association with a UMO or other CMO independently alters the effectiveness of other stimuli as reinforcers or punishers and alters the probability of those associate behaviors.
Here's an example. It's 74 degrees inside your house. You sit down on the couch and turn on TV, and you turn on a Hallmark Christmas movie.
Oh my gosh, I love Hallmark
Christmas
movies.
I chose this just for you, Jackie. And in the movie, it's snowing. Even though you are not cold, you're hot inside your 74-degree house, you go and get a blanket and snuggle up with it.
Oh, I love that.
Okay? So by seeing something on the screen that has previously been associated with a UMO, which is staying warm, you find that more reinforcing, even though the actual MO of being cold is not present.
I love that example. I do that
Thanks.
every
I just
day.
thought of it. This moment in
That
time.
is a great one, actually.
Thanks, man.
Whew. It really is. Because this happens all the time. My house is a steamy town, and I always have like 15 blankets on, and Matt's like, are you cold? I'm like, no. Like, I look at him like he's crazy. I'm like, no.
Just watching some Hallmark movies.
Just watching Hallmark, but not the murdering kind.
Right.
Just the Christmas love kind.
Okay.
It's almost time, guys. Y'all are invited to my house for a Christmas movie marathon.
Great. Can't
Cool.
wait.
So that one we're not really going to talk about a whole bunch today. Today we're going to really focus on CMO-R, the reflexive CMO, and CMO-T, which is transitive CMO.
Let's start with CMO-T because then CMO-R leads us right into our first article.
CMO-T is transitive CMO-T. It's when you have a stimuli in the context of which the value of existing condition reinforcers are altered, as is the likelihood of behaviors occurring that have been associated with such consequences in the past. So usually you might see this when you're doing incidental teaching. So you're contriving a situation which one stimulus will increase the value of a second stimulus as a type of reinforcer. But that second stimulus cannot be obtained until the given behavior has occurred. So I think the example I always think of is a cookie on a big shelf, like high up above.
Yep.
And there's like a little step stool, and you have to move the step stool to get on the step stool to get the cookie. Mm-hmm. So you can't get the cookie unless you get the step stool.
Yes.
So the step stool is a CMO-T.
Yeah.
Right? Makes sense?
Yeah.
Totally.
I love cookies.
Like today, I was served a nice mug of coffee.
Where?
A really fancy restaurant. It's called IHOP.
Oh,
Yeah. I don't know
yeah.
if you've ever been there, but it's really cutting edge.
Cool.
And only when I got my coffee and was getting ready to get it ready and drink the delicious coffee did I discover that I did not have a spoon.
Oh.
Right? So until that moment in time, I didn't care about not having a spoon. But suddenly having this coffee and wanting to fix it up nice and fancy and drink it increased the value and the behavior of trying to get a spoon. And I, in fact, asked the waitress, which you know I hate.
You do hate that.
Can I get a spoon?
I love asking the waitress for things.
I know.
Her number, to be best friends.
Selfie.
Yeah. Okay, and then the third CMO that we're going to talk about is the reflexive CMO. And we're going to have an article about that too, but I'll give you a little rundown. This one's kind of funny for me a little bit.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because Michael describes it as constituting a promise or a threat CMO. So it's like it's the onset of whatever this stimulus event is associated with either the improvement or worsening of the person's condition. More likely than not, the worsening. Most people talk about it in terms of the worsening of the person's condition. Therefore, its onset alters the value of its own removal, which I like that. It's like, oh, it's here. Oh, that's the worst. I need to do something to get rid of that.
Yeah.
I have an example.
Okay.
For this
Oh,
one.
yeah. Okay.
Whenever people start talking to me about CMOs, I immediately evokes any behavior that allows me to escape that conversation.
I have to pee.
Good job.
Oh, look over there. Punch in the throat. Anything. Just got to get out of there.
Punch in the throat. Perfect.
So
So that
It's a worsening of situations.
So that is a CMO-R.
That's a CMO-R.
Yeah.
One thing that I
Ta-da!
want to make sure that took me a little while to get and that I want everyone to understand is that it's not as though the special names for the CMOs are a subset entirely of CMOs. Like there are regular CMOs and then there are special CMOs. All CMOs fall into one of these categories. So
Right.
every time you say CMO, you can additionally define that into either a CMO-R, CMO-T, or maybe a CMO-S.
Right. And remember, those all fall under MOs.
Yep.
Motivating
That too.
operations is the huge umbrella. CMOs is the smaller umbrella for your kid friend. And then there's like 3 little tiny umbrellas underneath the medium umbrella and the large umbrella
For your dogs.
for your dogs.
So now that we have that description, why don't we talk about this first article? The role of the reflexive-conditioned motivating operation, parentheses, CMO-R, end parentheses, during discrete trial instruction of children with autism by Carbone, Morgenstern, Zecchin-Tirri, and Kolberg from Focus on Autism and Other Developmental Disabilities, 2010.
So spoiler alert for this article, it's not really a research study.
That's right.
It's a review.
It's a thought piece.
It is a good review. I do remember reading this back in 2016 and being a bit confused, and then rereading it and trying to say, okay, no, we're really recording this time. I have to pay really close attention. I did find this to be helpful, and it sort of just clicked. Like, okay, I understand where all of this CMO nonsense is coming from.
Yeah.
I
Well, we
get
tried
it
to
now. I
pick
get
2
it.
articles that are both have really clear practical application, and then the background to talk about related to them is how they relate to CMOs.
Right.
So this is some great practical stuff.
It's really great. One thing I love that you said, Rob, is that you had to read this multiple times, this article. So I think this, if you're like a new student of behavior analysis or even an old student of behavior analysis, I know that there are some articles that I started reading and I'm like, this is too wordy. And I would like throw it in a do not read pile. But then after a while, you take those articles out of the do not read pile and put them in your do read pile.
Put them in the fireplace.
Yeah. No, I think after multiple attempts, then things start to click. I was telling someone the story the other day so I teach experimental analysis of behavior, and I've been teaching it for like 3 years now, and I was like giving a lecture of some research article, and then I looked at the board at the like graph, and I was like, oh, that's what they mean there. And I mean, I got the study, but I didn't really get the study until that one moment. And everyone's like, what's going on? I was like, I just got it. I got that fine nuance that I was missing. So the more you read it, the more you're going to understand it. So
Definitely, yeah.
So don't back down from reading these more challenging articles about CMO-R, CMO-S if you don't understand them. That's the challenge for you, to keep reading them. Keep reading them until you can understand them, so you can have a valid argument with someone or yourself on whether you feel like they're necessary in the fork-term contingency as proposed by everyone. Yeah.
As proposed by everyone.
As proposed by everyone.
Citation, everyone.
Everyone 2017. So the reason that this little thought piece was created was to help us think about teaching kids with an autism spectrum disorder, because typically we're going to use discrete trial instruction, right? So a lot of the times we're focusing on discrete trial, which includes teacher directions. It's teacher directed. There's a lot of instructions. It's fast paced, a lot of demands.
Repetition,
right? Most people hate that, right? So if you just give it all out, just start it off there, you're just like, touch blue, touch blue, touch blue, touch green, touch yellow. That's horribly aversive, right? So this was a really nice way to have practitioners look at how we can make discrete trial instruction more motivating for our kids with autism, and to understand why you may see problem behavior during discrete trial instruction.
Yeah. And then to relate it to the CMO-R, the minute you say, come on over here, it's time to do some work in your cubby, like that instantly sets all the warning bells off, right? Like an aversive situation is fast approaching. My life has just worsened. What can I do to get out of this?
Right. Yeah. So a lot of the times people will suggest that the instruction is the SD, whereas here it's actually the SMO-R. CMO-R, sorry. SMO.
That's s'mores. We'll do that later.
The SMO-R.
If only we gave the kids more s'mores, they might appreciate these discrete trials.
You know, guys, I'm just
might be onto something wrong.
Just making sure you're listening. So this is something that I know in my career I've been like, no, the instruction is signaling the availability of reinforcement, but not actually, right? So that's signaling the availability that demands are going to be placed. There's going to be a worsening set of conditions where there's going to be a low rate of reinforcement. You're going to have to do something. You may have to do difficult responses. You may have to do a lot of responses. You may make errors. You're going to have a delay in positive reinforcement. That's a pretty worsening condition.
Yeah.
So I think maybe the teacher, just the presence of the teacher could actually be the discriminative stimulus there, whereas the demand actually would be the CMO-R in the classroom. So there you go, because the instructional demand doesn't signal the availability of reinforcement for problem behavior, which usually occurs.
Right.
You're like, touch blue, I'm going to hit my head to get out of this task.
Right.
So that's why it's a CMO-R. So here, the EO is changing how much people want something, and the SD changes their chances of getting it.
I think this article was fun in that it, after I got over the hump of not wanting to read it at all, I think it was fun in that it really started with the idea of like, well, why is this? Well, plenty of people have explained why discrete trial training can be preferred or non-preferred. It could be, oh, well, there's too much repetition. It could be, oh, you're signaling a delay of reinforcement. But that's sort of basic. Why don't we look at it as how this motivating operation plays into it? Because that allows us to be much more analytic and thoughtful about our decisions as to how can we change programming so that we're not evoking tantrum behavior when we say it's time for work. So again, if you really don't feel like reading about CMORs, I suppose you could just skip this article and just think about it in sort of the broad strokes. But if you really want to get to the heart of why some of those updated techniques or why some of those changes we can make to discrete trial training work, then you probably want to be thinking about it in terms of the CMO-R and how motivation is playing an impact into the whole contingency.
Yeah, and I have always been wary of adding additional terminology into our science. But in this case, when we're going to go through this whole list, you know, and if we didn't have the overarching framework of talking about things in terms of the motivating operations to kind of hang this all together, it might sound like a bag of tricks. Yep. And that's not what our science is, right? So in this case, I really think that thinking about it in this type of terminology makes it more conceptually systematic for our field and allows us to have these types of discussions. So I think it's useful.
One other thing that I kind of like that I've been thinking a lot about is one of the criticisms in our field is that we don't deal with the entire person, right? So we're only dealing with environmental events and how they affect the person, and they don't really talk about the person.
Yeah.
And so I've heard this a lot while I'm working with like typical preschool teachers. And one thing I like about the CMO is that motivation to respond. So you can discuss in terms of, well, student may not be engaging in this because they're not motivated. They're, because of what's happened in the past to them, that's, this is something a little bit different that I think it brings a more holistic approach to discussing what's going on.
Good point.
There have been, one thing I love about this article too is they say nothing new is presented in this article. I love that. They're like, no methods that we're going to talk about are new, and you're like, wow. But these methods that they're talking about are antecedent manipulations, and they're talking about them in a different way. So talking about them and how they relate to the CMO-R and how we can reduce the effects of that worsening condition during discrete trial instruction. I think that's funny, though, that there's like nothing new is in here. So spoiler alert.
Jackie, before you get into that list of the CMO-R and how we can use our knowledge of CMRs to improve our discrete trial training, why don't we take a little break, keep everyone on the edge of their seats, and then we'll be right back with more CMOs.
Hey, ABA Inside Trackers. Are you interested in being a behavior analyst and you're not yet? If so, I really would recommend looking into the Regis College Masters in Science and Applied Behavior Analysis program. Our 2016 pass rates for first-time test takers of the BCBA exam was 90%. We think this is a true testament to our program. In addition, we're going to be starting an on-campus autism center in the summer of 2017. This is going to allow our graduate students on-hands learning right at our college, and you will receive partial tuition remission if you work at the center, which is pretty amazing. We also offer paid clinical placements and graduate assistantships starting in our students' first year, where all of our grad students are working in the field either part-time or full-time. I find you that job. That is part of my job. We also are approved by the BACB to provide intensive practicum, so students will complete 750 hours of an intensive practicum across their time at Regis. All of our faculty are PhD-level BCBAs with strong applied and research backgrounds in ABA, and all have published papers in respected peer-reviewed journals. We ensure small class sizes so that all students receive personalized attention from their professors and advisors, are easily accessible to meet with students. Two more really great things that I want to highlight about the Regis program is that we host an invited lecture series at Regis each year, which involves inviting outside experts in ABA to speak on specialized topics relating to practicing ABA. Last summer, we completed an international service trip to Iceland. This trip enabled students to learn more about providing culturally competent care to diverse populations. Students and alums worked with children diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder and provided parent and teacher trainings for 11 days. This service trip occurs every other year, and the next trip will be in the summer of 2018. And finally, we have a great location. We're just 12 miles from the center of Boston. We currently have rolling admission. We're accepting students until we reach capacity for the fall of 2017. Please check us out at www.regiscollege.edu.
And we are back with more talk of CMOs. So before we left, Jackie, you were going to talk about how CMO-Rs can be used to sort of improve our knowledge of what are we doing when we implement any of these changes to discrete trial training.
Yeah. So they lay out a few methods to reduce these effects. One of them is called programming competing reinforcers. What do you guys think about that? What does it sound like?
This is your basic idea of reinforcing appropriate responses rather than reinforcing the tantrum behavior or the SIP.
Yeah. So they said that there's been several studies here that show that behavior evoked by a CMO-R and reinforced through termination of the demand situation can be reduced without controlling the negative reinforcing consequences that maintain that behavior before. So if we can strengthen that appropriate behavior and weaken that inappropriate behavior, you're less likely to see a worsening condition when you implement any sort of instruction or demand. So that's pretty neat.
Sense.
Have you guys used this before?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you have.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's also known as functional communication training.
Wait a minute.
So you're making it more likely that the presentation of demand is not as horrible as it once was. And then the second method that they discuss that we could use to reduce the effects of the CMO-R is to pair and embed the instructional environment with positive reinforcement. So in other words, just embedding reinforcing activities in the context of instructional demand. So maybe not to be like touch blue, touch blue,
Yeah.
touch blue, touch blue, but embed some reinforcing activities to reduce the likelihood that an instructional demand will be a worsening condition.
Mm-hmm. Maybe play at the table first before you do work there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like playing. Another suggestion they give is using errorless instruction. So here, errorless instruction reduces the frequency that errors will occur, and that will also hypothetically reduce the frustration around engaging in a response following instruction. I know that I hate it when I hear the word try again, right? So if someone's like, and you're like, do this, and I do it, and they're like, try again. That's pretty anxiety provoking for me.
Right, yeah.
And frustrating. So if we can lessen that by manipulating our prompting strategies so that we make this environment less horrible.
Nice. When I remember the difference between CMO-R and CMO-T, for me, when you say CMO-R, it almost sounds like you're going to say wrong, like CMO wrong, which would be this particular aspect of it, right? Like hearing that you're wrong about something. So that's how I remember the difference. And CMO-T, I think the T as a plus. So like adding something that you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. Oh, that's a good strategy.
Thanks.
So another suggestion that they provide is stimulus demand fading. Has anyone ever done this before?
Sure.
Stimulus demand fading, where you start fading in demand. So you take them all away initially, and then you slowly increase the amount of demands. Yeah.
I mean, none of the descriptions that they provide in this article are anything that most people haven't heard a million times.
Yeah.
It's all about how can we make that it's time for work, not a CMO-R.
Yeah. So demand fading is a big commitment.
It certainly
right?
is.
And where I worked, we always called it zero baseline, which
Yeah.
I later learned was just a very specific thing that no one else called it. So demand fading is the more common term. But if you're going to do demand fading, you probably have a dire situation on your hands. That
Right.
You are seriously need to back it all the way up to no demands. And then it's a slow process to build back up from there. But it does work, and it can work. But you have to be ready to commit.
Right.
It's like the nuclear option of, well, we could try to make all these other parts of work better, but the odds are everything about us and the school environment is a CMO-R at this point.
Everyone has to understand and be ready to for that student to not do any academic work for like a month.
Right. Yeah. Or longer.
Or longer.
Right. So there are a lot of other options that they give, so I'm just gonna kind of breeze over them. But one of the things I think that is very important, and I'm gonna highlight, are these two suggestions that they provide. Number one, choice making. So choice making, I think, is a really important. It's a really important procedure to put into your incidental your discrete trial teachings, because if you give choices throughout the day, you're not only increasing choice-making repertoire of the individual, but also potentially decreasing the aversiveness of those instructional demands.
Listen to episode 9 about choice with Dr. Alan Carcina.
Right.
If you'd like to learn more.
Yeah, it makes me excited. And then the last one that I'm going to talk about is interspersed instruction. So here, this one's a nice one, and I know there's a lot of research out looking at right now. Is like mass trialing or block trialing or interspersed instruction more effective when you see acquisition faster? And I know the results are mixed right now. But this is one strategy that you could use if you're seeing a lot of escape maintain problem behavior in the context of your discrete trial. So mix it up a little bit.
And the results are mixed because likely it's going to be vary on the individual. Yeah. So it's not to say that it may not be effective. It just seems to vary individual to individual, whether it's necessary.
Yeah.
In this article, they were looking not so much at is interspersal versus mass trial versus one of the other types of trials better way to learn, so much as mass trials could be very aversive because they are repetitive, which folks tend to dislike. Therefore, interspersal might be a means of diminishing the CMO-R that exists by saying let's do work. So I think this is different than some of those articles in that this is more, can we make it less aversive? Not so much is interspersal a better means of teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I only know that because I remember someone at a place I used to work who was like always in my face but interspersal, but they never talk about the research. And I read this and I was just thinking, I'm going to remember this so I can shove it in their face the next time I see them.
And now you have virtually.
And now I have. Probably cut that part of vengeance out.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But you know what? Nothing motivates. Is that a CMOT? Right? The knowledge of
I don't know.
That's funny.
sense of superiority is my CMOT.
But so really, we've highlighted a few of these different methods. There's a few more in the article that we don't really necessarily need to go into at length. But it's really important to think about the CMO-R and how we can reduce the effects of the CMO-R to make discrete trial instruction more motivating and more effective for our learners. So when you're looking at it, this is a really nice way to tie back what you're doing to the conceptual systematic principles of our field. Yeah.
And if you're interested in learning more about these topics, then you could also listen to episode 6 from ABA Inside Track on pre-session pairing with Dr. Amanda Kelly. As Rob mentioned, you could listen to episode 9 on choice with Dr. Alan Carcina, or you could listen to episode 11, which is just with us, on preventing errors in discrete trial instruction.
Mm-hmm.
Woo!
Please enjoy.
Wow. So before we talk about our next article, I just want to remind anyone listening, if you are looking for continuing education credits, well, you've come to the right place, as ABA Inside Track is ACE approved for Type 2 CEs. We continue to be. I'm getting a thumbs up from Jake.
We are.
So to do that, to earn CEs from us, you just need to do a couple simple things, one of which is listen to this episode. Good job. You're already
halfway
doing
there.
that. And then the other is to apply on our website. We have a link in the info button on your podcast player. And you can also go to our website. And you'll just need to have a couple pieces of information, most of which are simple, your BCBA number, all that jazz, and 2 secret code words that you'll only know if you listen to the whole episode. And the first of those secret code words is impossible. IMPOSSIBLE. Impossible.
Sometimes Rob is impossible.
Luke, I am your father.
No, that's not true. That's impossible.
Got it?
Impossible. And with that, let's move into the realm, continue to look at the realm of CMOs and establishing operations with our second article, Manipulating Establishing Operations to Verify and Establish Stimulus Control During Manned Training by Gutierrez Jr., Vollmer, Dozier, Borrero, Rapp, Bourret, and Gadaire.
Everyone.
From the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, 2007.
For real. They pulled in all the big guns for
They
this
got
one.
all the heavy hitters.
I feel a little bit jealous that I wasn't included on this in 2007.
I know, like, couldn't they have just put you in there?
Jackie.
But you know why? 7 authors.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
the limit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not really the limit, but if you want your names listed, it's the limit.
I don't know anyone.
Also, you didn't do this research, so probably you shouldn't.
And I don't know any of these people personally.
Yeah, you do.
Oh, yeah, I do.
You know at
Just
least
kidding.
one of these people personally.
Yeah, I'm lying. Just kidding. I'm very popular. That's
Okay.
also just kidding.
So this article is related to the use of a picture exchange system.
Ooh.
Manipulation of establishing operations. And then specific to our topic today, it's related to the CMO-T, which, as you may remember, increases the value of something that you're looking to access by previous association with other CMO or UMO, right? So remember with the T, which is, for me to remember, it's the plus.
Transitive.
It's the transitive, yes, but we're adding something to the mix to make it more reinforcing. With this article, like I said, they were talking mostly about PECs in manned training. So here, with a picture exchange system, you have an item that's either present or not present, and we teach the student to pull off the picture off of their PECs board and hand it over to someone in order to access that item. So so there can be presumed to be an MO present there, right? Because without that MO, they're much less likely to pick up that picture and hand it over in order to access the item. And some items are food, but others might be other types of learned reinforcers. So those would be the CMOs. Generally in PECs, as you're doing the PECs training system, there's a correspondence check component. And in the correspondence check, let me make sure I get this right, the individual hands over the picture from an array of pictures.
Right.
And then the adult presents an array of items and says, sure, take the one that you asked for. So the idea there is that you're building in a discrimination check, basically, between are they going to pick the same one that they picked when they handed over the picture. However, Gutierrez and colleagues point out that it's possible that the MO that was present when the picture was handed over is different than the MO that's present when the actual item is selected, when you're doing the correspondence check this way. And there's no really good solid way to know. So if an individual picks a different item than they handed the picture over for, perhaps they are not truly discriminating the stimuli, but perhaps now they see the items in person and they actually want something different than they wanted previously.
Mm-hmm. That can happen.
Yeah.
It totally can happen. And, I might initially, maybe I did want M&Ms, but then I see those Hershey Kisses there and I'm like, no, wait, I love Hershey Kisses. I just forgot. That happens to me all the time.
Have they learned if I hand you this picture of this, I'm manding for that specific item versus like, here's a picture, give me a thing.
Yes. That can most certainly happen. And if anyone has experience using any type of symbol exchange, then that can be a common roadblock to overcome. Does this book allow me to ask for discriminated items, or is it just, this is my book of goodies, and if I hand over a picture, then I get something good?
It's like the difference between actual language and just sort of like lever pressing as a response.
Yeah.
Well, it's a undiscriminated versus a discriminated response. So we want the discriminated so we can know what someone really, really wants. So the point of this article was to manipulate the EO that was present during the man training conditions in order to determine if a discriminated response was actually occurring, because they felt like there was this tricky part about the correspondence check. So they wanted to manipulate that. So there were 4 participants in the study. Mario was 13. He had a developmental disabilities diagnosis, but presented similarly to having autism. Then there was Millie, who was 4, Will, who was 5, and Malcolm, who was 6, and they all had a diagnosis of autism.
Those are all great names.
They are.
Man, I want to take all of those names and start a TV show.
Millie is a great name. I
My
really
friend's
love it.
kid's name is Millie.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Way to go, Josh.
These participants had minimal exposure to picture cards before, so they were not regular PECS users. The sessions were about 30 minutes. They were 10 trials each, and they occurred 3 to 5 times a week. And it was basic man training, as you would do with a picture exchange program. So they learned to hand over the cards, and they could access 30 seconds of one of the activities or until they consumed the item. They did IOA. It was all good. The materials for this study were super simple. They had 2 pictures with preferred items on them. They did a preference assessment, and each of them had 1 edible item like chips, cookie, or drink, and then 1 activity such as music, radio, or TV. And in addition to the 2 picture cards, they had 2 distractor cards, which just had an X or an O on them. There were 6, count them, 6 phases in this study. The first phase was a preference assessment. It was my favorite kind of preference assessment, free operant preference assessment.
Oh.
Which, when I open up the cabinets, that is a free operant preference assessment, and I love it. I wish I got to do those every day. I guess I kind of do.
You do get 2 every day. You were like,
Let's be honest.
Today it's Cheerios or Chex Mix.
But that was the beauty of it. They just put out all sorts of things, and they lasted 1 to 2 minutes, and they saw what they went for, and that's what they considered the highest preferred item, which, makes sense. All right, so they did that first to establish what was going to be on the picture cards. Then they had phase 2, in which everyone learned, or they made sure they knew how to hand over a single card to access an item. Phase 3, they did a distractor card probe. So they had 1 picture and 1 distractor, and they handed over the item. Important distinction, whichever card they handed over, they got access to the item. Phase 4 was a differential reinforcement, which was the man training. So here, there were same 2 cards were present. Now, when they handed over the picture, they got the item. When they handed over the distraction card, it was on extinction. So no item was presented. And they did that until they saw that occurring independently at high levels. And then they taught that, if needed, for both picture cards. Independently, not presented together, but presented with a distractor. Phase 5 was the real meat of the study, which was the manipulation of the EO. So here was the first time that the 2 picture cards were presented together, no distractor, and the EO manipulation piece, this is important, was that for one of the 2 picture cards, they had that item freely available. So it alternated. Either they had music playing in the background, and then they had the music card and the chips card present. Or they had a big old bowl of chips there, and the music card and the chip card
I love
present.
that.
I know, right? So if they handed over the picture card of the non-present item, they accessed it, which is the reinforcer. And if they handed over the picture card of the present item, no change occurred.
I love this. I just imagined a kid just like chomping away at chips, being like, this is my dream. Give me some music.
You know what? I need some music.
This is my dream. Give me some music.
Right? It's such an easy manipulation to make, but it gets at the heart of the exact question.
Right.
So like you already have access to music. You don't need to hand over that card. But if you can discriminate between the cards, then you're going to hand over the picture of chips because you don't have access to that. The other thing I should add is that those things were present but out of reach.
Yes.
Right? So they knew that they would be available, but were not able to access them. Okay? So phase 5 was a huge success for
3.
Mario, Will, and Malcolm.
Okay.
Millie did not exhibit discriminated responding. She handed over both cards indiscriminately. So they went on to phase 6 for Millie, which was to teach a vocal mand for one item and a card mand for the other item.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. So fortunately, Millie had some vocalizations that were reliable. She learned to say chips to access chips and to continue to hand over a card to access music. So they were worried about the topographical similarity of the picture response, right? So either way, you're just doing the same action and handing over a card. So they felt that perhaps that discrimination was too fine for her to make. So that's why they switched one of them over to vocal. So they taught her that first. And then in phase 6B, they did the EO manipulation with the vocal response in the card. So the same thing where sometimes it was music or
Like
TV.
phase 5. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're present. And then once they made that change, they saw the discriminated responding for Millie too.
That's awesome.
I know.
Wow, that's like a dream come true, right? Because you're like, I hope this
Like,
works.
oh no. But that was a little bit of an unusual change that they needed to make. But they pointed out that, sometimes this happens. If you've worked with, a lot of kids that use PECs, this does sometimes happen where you just don't see that discriminated responding. And for those types of students, it could be that teaching some type of topographically dissimilar response, whether it be vocalizations or sign, may be a better route to go if you're having difficulty with the picture exchange. Okay.
So that's awesome. They found out that, yes, there was discriminated responding.
Yeah. So they said Millie, she may have been tacting what she was seeing versus requesting with the pictures. She may have been manding for more of the thing that she already had as a way she was attempting to indicate she did not want it to end.
Sure.
Right? So those were some of the alternate explanations for why they didn't see that, in addition to, not discriminating what was going on with the pictures. When you're using PECs and you get to that point where you need to do this type of correspondence check, then they recommend perhaps trying an EO manipulation of this type in order to determine if discrimination really has occurred. And there's, not saying you have to, but it might be a useful addition to, the PEC's curriculum is very specific, but this might be something that you could also do to check on the discrimination component and use your manipulation of your CMOT to determine if the discrimination is really there.
So can you describe in a little more detail, Diana, how the CMOT comes into this? Because it's not ever mentioned as a CMOT in the article. So how is it sort of defined in this context?
So they're making modification or manipulations to the EO, right? By having, let's say, the chips present in the music tape player, I don't know, CD player, iPod, MP3. What is the current term? I don't even know. iPod player out of reach, right? So by doing that, they have manipulated the environmental contingencies. And the EO, in this case, it's an EO, it's a CMO, and it's a CMOT because we're looking to add something to our environment and make it better. The CMOT for asking for chips should not be present, right? Because we got a big old bowl of chips and we can freely eat them all we like. However, the CMOT for accessing music should be present because music is not currently happening, right? And maybe hasn't been happening for a while. So that should increase the value of accessing that reinforcer as well as increase the value of engaging in behavior that should produce access to that reinforcer.
So does the presence of the radio all of a sudden, like, oh, you've been eating chips for 30 minutes, but you haven't had any radio. Here's your radio. The radio is the CMOT?
No, the radio would be the discriminative stimulus, right?
It's the absence of having the radio.
Right.
That's the CMOT.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that your question? So those reinforcers are going to require an additional step in order to access them, which is handing over the item, the picture, right? So that's an important piece here as well, is that you need to engage in additional behavior in order to access those. And having them unavailable at the current moment in time is what's going to make them more reinforcing. So increase the value of accessing those reinforcers. And by making it this really stark contrast of having both those pictures there, having free access to one item, and then having the other item removed, or not removed, but not present, should make that distinction clearer. Also, they were doing this back and forth.
Yep.
Like they'd have one item and the other item would be gone, and then they'd switch it and do it the other way. So they were experiencing this over again.
Right, but the radio was in the room. They hadn't access. So the presence of the radio could be the discriminative stimulus. Right. The absence of the music is the CMOT.
Okay.
Right? So we got CMOT, absence of music. We've got the radio. We can see it. We can't hear anything.
Right.
Discriminative stimulus sets the occasion for reinforcement. The response is you find a little pitch card. I want music. You have to hand it to the experimenter. Then, and only then, will music then start playing. 4-term contingency. Make sense? Cool.
Got it? Good. No more questions.
All right.
Yeah.
And what was the final conclusion of this is just kind of one way you could double check your discrimination has occurred in your picture communication training?
Yeah. This actually has a really nice discussion where they talk about, Millie's results and why those were perhaps aberrant, as well as relating it back to the overall PECS training, and gave us some really good things to think about. So I recommend reading through that. And then if you want to learn more about AAC specifically, then you could listen to episode 22 of ABA Inside Track. This is a
you
great
guys are
one.
so good at referencing numbers.
It's because I spent
know.
a lot of time with that spreadsheet, man.
Yeah.
I think that wraps up our 2 articles, which means it's probably time to pull into Dissemination Station.
Welcome back, guys. I'm the engineer. You haven't been here in a long time.
You're right, we haven't.
No, sorry, engineer. We've been busy with our other
I've
topics.
been supervising people.
Phew, I'm so glad you're back. I should be on Thomas the Tank.
That was pretty good.
I know.
You do a good Sir Topham hat.
Thank you. That's who I was emulating. I really think the main crux of our discussion today was that it's important to think about the possibility of motivation when we are dealing with either discrete trial or setting up the environment to teach MANs or decreasing problem behavior, looking at the 4-term contingency and taking into account what could or could not value the effectiveness of the reinforcer or affect the behavior.
I agree. I like Jackie's article a lot because it was highly relevant to practitioners in the field and thinking about how these things might affect student behavior in their classroom and overall how should you be setting up your instructional time in your classroom. So I thought it was a really nice, thoughtful approach.
And tying it back to the foundations of behavior analysis and not saying, here's a bag of things that you can do.
Right.
Here's a lot of antecedent manipulations that you can take into account, but just do them all.
Right. Who knows why they work?
Who cares?
Yeah. So it was nice in that regard. And then this article about the PECS and the correspondence check I thought was nice too because it addresses some of those potential things that do often linger when you're trying to work on discrimination training is how do we really know for sure that we have here what we think we have here. So I thought it was a really ingenious way of testing that, and it was cool to see how they kind of problem solve through it.
Yeah, I like that.
I for one wish there were more articles like the Carbone article in terms of, hey, here's this concept that you kind of get, but you probably don't talk about very much because when you do, you feel like you sound stupid,
Right.
and you're confusing yourself and others, and not a lot of people are great at fluently talking about CMOs to begin with, so maybe just go back to your bag of tricks. That's a lot easier to understand. The way that it was like, look, there's like 10 different ways we can use some tricks to describe how CMOs, CMO-Rs in that case specifically, are working in our 3-term contingency was very helpful. I mean, both articles did get to the idea of the idea of the EO or MOs, but I liked how that one really spelled it out in a way that was taking a concept. Like, you get this concept, right? You get stimulus fading. You get the neutralizing routines, right? You understand what that is. But what if I describe it this way? And I know I, for one, would love to have more, either, if they're not articles, just more opportunities to talk about a lot of what we do in those terms, because I know this is still a topic that I feel I have a better understanding of. I still would be very scared to talk out loud about CMOs without saying, what am I talking about? I mixed up the discriminative stimulus and the CMO, or I think I'm talking about something that doesn't exist as the CMO, because it gets a little too conceptual, and when things get conceptual, I feel like it's very easy to start either rambling like I'm doing now, or talking about things that may or may not exist, or starting to talk about, words in air quotes to try to.
And our terminology is so precise, and I feel that it's easy to misstep. And if we have misstepped in this episode, we apologize. You can let us know. We'll address it in our errata upcoming. So.
We're working through it just like everyone else.
Yeah.
Let's all agree to be really nice to each other about discussing CMOs.
That's right, because you don't want to make discussing them a CMO-R like they are for you, right?
They are right now. I think if someone smiled at me while they were talking about CMOs, I might be willing to talk about them. But I've met people who they start talking about it, and you can tell they're just looking down their nose at you. And it's just, I want to get out of the conversation for multiple reasons, specifically because I don't think I can keep up, and this person's going to be mean to me.
Yeah, that's no good, man.
Yeah,
like, we're a small field. We should all play nice together and try to help each other with some of these harder topics.
The more that everyone understands, the better the field will be. Did
LeVar Burton say that?
No, but he should. The more that everyone knows, if everyone understands something, right, then we can get deeper into what's actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? So if everybody's on the same page on this 4-term contingency, then we can get deeper into exactly what is going on in behavior. Because right now we can kind of, but we're not certain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's going to help us further define the terminology that we use. And, sometimes when you're playing around with this, particularly with CMO-Rs, I think it's like, well, the work's a CMO-R, but then the work is also you're saying the teacher is the SD, but like they're all kind of rolled in together, right?
Yeah.
So like, what's the MO and what's the SD?
Or you're talking about like the actual, the picture card I'm holding up and I want you to tact. Is that the SD?
Right. It could be.
Right.
Yeah.
Everything else is a CMO-R, but this picture might be an SD.
Right. And sometimes you're kind of splitting hairs when you get down to it, right? So I think in those situations, just being able to talk about it together and understand what these concepts mean, like whether it's the teacher or the card or whatever, maybe that's less important than understanding like there's an MO present and there are SDs present here, and what's going to be ultimately reinforcing is a negative reinforcer of escaping from the situation.
Right.
And the more that we can understand all the different components of that and be able to talk it through together, even if there's sometimes at the end of it maybe not a precise answer, the better we're still going to understand behavior and what's going on there. And I think that's a good takeaway.
Me too.
So everyone try to talk more fluently about MOs, and let's all agree to be nice to each other when we do that and be kind.
I'm in.
Don't make the face like, ooh, don't you sound stupid. At me. You know who you are, person. Don't be mean to me. I'm very sensitive.
It's okay, Rob.
It was nice.
Don't cry.
It was nice to be back here with you guys in regular land and not supervision land.
Right? I know.
Yeah. Oh, actually, before we go anywhere, before we leave the platform, we need a second secret code word if people are listening to this for CEs. And that code word is gingerbread. 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 Like a gingerbread house, or gingerbread boy, or gingerbread friends, or gingerbread
Girl.
Because
Maybe?
it's almost Christmas.
Winter is coming.
I could tell you the exact date, but it would be wrong.
That winter is coming.
That's awesome.
Okay, bye.
All right.
Okay,
and
bye.
that's about it for us here at ABA Inside Track. Thank you, Jackie and Diana, for helping go over this very complex topic. And thank you, Robert and Allison, for recommending this. Sorry it took a year plus to go over this topic. But hey, if you recommend a topic, we'll get to it eventually. Don't you worry. ABA Inside Track can be found pretty much everywhere online and social media. You can go to our website, Facebook, Twitter. You can also email us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. If you liked our show, please think about subscribing to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, anywhere you can get podcasts. And we always appreciate reviews, whether it's on the Facebook page, whether you just email us some words of feedback or words of support, or if you just want to leave a review through the regular podcast review means. We appreciate all of that information, and we try to take it into our discussions of how we can improve our show. So, thank you all for listening. Thanks again, Jackie and Diana. We'll be back next week with another preview episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye-bye.